Hey YouTube. Well, I thought I'd do a story time today. I'm going to read again from my memoir, Meth Monster. This is it. It's available at Amazon. Yeah. So I was just thinking. Thinking. Sometimes here's a principle I want to bring today. Sometimes the things that you think are the worst moments of your life are actually things that have altered your life, changed things, right? So the good thing about writing a memoir, and I encourage people to do that, before the time to check out, it gives you an opportunity to reflect and to go over the things that happened in your life. So anyway, I said all that to say, I'm going to read a little bit from Meth Monster and kind of talk about the experience. But, okay, let me give you a little context here. All right. This chapter is called Coming Out. So this is not a coming out story in a gay way. This is a coming out story when I came out of the old life I used to live. All right, so at this point, there's no desire to get clean and sober. None. I had done crystal meth for 17 years. Sold it seriously for 10 years. I've been to prison 10 times in 10 years. For that, selling that drug. Okay, so my point is, this is the point where things change for me. Okay, I'll read a little bit. I'll try not to get carried away. In the year 2000, I encountered something I finally recognized as evil. All my life, I had lived with a deeply rooted fear of any kind of physical violence. I have no doubt that this fear was inextricably tied to the domestic violence I witnessed as a small child. I never learned to fight and had zero interest in exerting physical dominance over any living thing. Violence had been the catalyst for abruptly ending both of my significant relationships, and now in the year 2000, it became once again the catalyst for change. Okay, so I've only had 2 serious relationships in my life, 2.5, one with more an obsession. But when the relationships got to the point where there was any kind of physical violence, and I was the aggressor, I'll admit that, the relationships were over. There's one thing I couldn't go. There's a line I couldn't cross. Violence in a relationship is not going to work for me. I came from that kind of background from as far back as I can remember. Those are my earliest memories. So, my point is, I never allowed violence in my life. Okay. I don't believe for a second that God assigned a man to come out from between 2 parked cars and smash a beer bottle over my head. But because I know that he has such an intricate knowledge of me, I believe that he allowed it to happen. My Lord knew exactly what it would take to bring me out. In all the years that I had used and sold drugs, never once had I come face to face with this, my greatest fear. I had spent half a lifetime surviving by my wits alone, and now there was no opportunity for talking my way out of this situation. My reaction was swift. I ran screaming into oncoming traffic. Okay, it's an actual thing that happened. Okay, I was what they call balling for us, for drug addicts. Balling for us was riding around on a bicycle, and having a roof over your head at night. But I had drugs. Okay, when I got out of, I just got out of prison. People told me on the street, be careful of this person. This person is robbing drug dealers. Right? So I was already aware of this person. So a situation happened. One of my little runners guys was getting jumped on by this guy. So I came and said, "Oh, well, how much do you owe you?" I just gave you the money. I had plenty of money. I just gave him the money. So now this guy has taken this to be, I'm in his business now. So now this guy is stalking me. Of course, all that is bullshit. Who would be mad because somebody paying somebody's debt off? It gave him an excuse or a reason to try to rob me. That's what it came down to. Okay. So when he hit me in the head with the beer bottle. Now I have lived my whole life without violence in my life. I have not been robbed. I've been selling drugs for years, and I'm talking about with dangerous people. They didn't know that I was not. I could put on a facade. Not that I was any kind of tough guy, but I don't think people really realize who I was. Mostly it was an act on the streets. Anyway, let me keep reading. Okay. So he hit me, and I ran screaming down the middle of the street in Tenderloin. That's the only way that was my reaction to get him off of me. And it worked. He ran the other way with my backpack, which had nothing in it, of cameras and junk, gym clothes or something. But this was the beginning of the end. So this incident, which I thought was the worst thing that ever happened to me, pay attention. Okay, no doubt this was the beginning of the end of my drug addiction and life of crime. But make no mistake, it was just that, the beginning of the end. This business of running away when I was attacked had the potential of becoming a very serious problem for me. Word spread fast when a dealer got hit. As a rule, you couldn't be both a coward and a drug dealer at the same time. Once you got tagged as an easy mark, the vultures would start circling. The only way to save face would be to retaliate, swift and hard. But who was I kidding? I was the kind of guy who hesitated before stepping on a cockroach. Besides that, I had other pressing issues to deal with, especially with my new connection. The harder I worked, it seemed, the deeper I got into debt. Back in the early days, when I first arrived in San Francisco, I could have turned this situation around with my eyes closed. But by this time, I had been living with full-blown AIDS, as defined by my T-cell counts, for 6 or 7 years. Truth told, all I really wanted to do was find a nice soft bed somewhere and lie down. But of course, I couldn't do that. Not as long as I was in debt and holding someone else's merchandise. Okay, so this is right before these protease inhibitors, these HIV drugs came out. So at the time this happened, there was some AZT. There was not really real serious drugs out for HIV. So as far as I know, I was on the decline on my way to death. I would say on my way to hell, but I don't believe there is a hell. So anyway, there was no drugs at the time, right? So it's like the end was coming, and I couldn't lay down because I had been fronting all this other people's dope. Okay. This would have been a very good time to go to jail. If you got busted and kept your mouth shut, all drug decks would be canceled. This would also give this whole situation with the attempted robbery a chance to cool off. I wouldn't be expected to retaliate if I were locked up. And of course, the other benefit would be that I could finally get some much needed rest. Okay, you have to retaliate. You get robbed, you get hurt. People are watching. They are watching. They were looking for a weakness. Weakness on the street. They could smell it. So the best thing for me to do is be to disappear at this point. If I wasn't going to go up against this dude or make something happen to him, I needed a solution. For me, perfect solution would be to go to jail. Okay. If you got busted and kept your mouth shut, all drug deaths would be canceled. Okay. This would also give the situation with the attempted robbery a chance to cool off. I wouldn't be expected to retaliate if I were locked up. And of course, the other benefit would be that I could finally get some much needed rest. As if spiritual forces were looking out for me, that is exactly what happened. Not 2 weeks after the beer bottle man struck, the cops were once again at my door. Although this was my third time to be sent to CMC, California Men's Colony in San Luis Obispo, right from the beginning, I could tell that this time was going to be different. Very different. The first evidence of change was in my attitude, specifically towards the streets, doing time, and drugs in general. It was as if a veil had been lifted from my eyes, and now I could finally see my life for what it was. Gone were my usual stories, my bragging and my embellishments of my exploits on the mean streets of San Francisco. Gone also was the desire to return to them. The Bible says that no man cometh unto God unless he be drawn. Well, there's no question that I was being drawn or pulled by something. The next significant change came when I, Timothy Blaine, showed up at the doors of the prison chapel. Understand that although I had identified I wanted to turn my life around, this was not the logical next step for me. As a young man, I had been schooled in the ways of the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. In my mind, recovery from drugs and alcohol was synonymous with working a 12-step program. Still, there was something much deeper pulling at me. Could it be this business of mortality? that my tired and worn out body and soul were telling me to prepare myself for the inevitable. I didn't really write these words. I don't know why I can't pronounce them. I don't know what it was, but there was something deep within me telling me that I needed something more than to simply get off drugs. The drugs were only a symptom of the spiritual emptiness and despair that went all the way to the core of my being. So here I was after all these years, attending a Christian church of my own volition. I hadn't been inside a chapel since my sister's wedding back in 1977. And before that, my attendance was at best sporadic, mostly on holidays or for the occasional wedding. It's not that I hadn't been exposed to church early on. Like in many African American families, my grandmother had tried her best to keep us all grounded there. But in my youth, my mother was not very interested in going to church. So for the most part, my immediate family didn't go. Ironically, now, in the year 2000, my mother was the very person witnessing to me. In fact, this had been going on for several years. This is all via the mail, of course. At first, I thought my mom had gone a little soft in the head. I'd write her long letters from prison, trying to explain my circumstances and maybe talk about current events, and she fired back with 5 or 6 pages of scripture. I'd ask her how my sisters and their families were doing, and she answered with quotes from Romans or Galatians. If I asked how the weather was, I'd likely get John, Luke, and Matthew. At that time, I simply was not ready to receive the message she was trying so desperately to convey, and many of those letters were merely scanned over and thrown to the back of my locker. But now, in my hour of need, I had to concede that my mother had undergone a profound and dramatic change. Never had I known her to be so passionate about anything. I had certainly seen it in my grandmother, and I knew how seriously the world in general took various religions. But after all, this was my own mother, the one person that I had known since the day of my birth and before. She was simply not the kind of woman to be easily converted to faith in anything. Nor was she likely to join a church or any other institution or organization merely for community or a sense of belonging. Most plainly put, my mother was anything but a people person. Some would say funny style in the South. My mother was extremely funny style. But she had a spiritual awakening, and I could see the difference in her. No, whatever had happened to my mom, she certainly wasn't faking it. She was without a doubt Christian. Now I had to wonder, was it possible that there might be something locked away in that ancient text for me as well? With all of my negative history and my unbridled capacity for self-delusion and self-destruction, any change would have to be profound and radical. So what about this Jesus? Who was he really? How did this whole thing work? Had the time come for me to find out? Dare I open that Bible? I'll be the first to admit that up until this point, I had done virtually no investigation into the Christian experience. But even with my limited knowledge, I had long thought that there was something very suspicious about this perception that God was only the God of people who got married and had babies. Just a teeny bit more. There's no question that my process had begun by this time, but it wasn't going to be like on television. I didn't just walk through the doors of the prison chapel and then 30 minutes later lay my burdens, including over 20 years of drug addiction, down on the altar. That's not to say that I don't believe God can and sometimes will do that. It's only to say that's not my testimony. Still, I did feel like I was through with drugs, and I went about making plans like a person who was not returning to the life. Okay, I guess I can stop there. Okay, so this is my, hopefully this book is not over religious, but I think it's important. Because I'm just telling the truth, telling my truth. I think that's the best thing about writing. Can you tell the truth? Can you be honest? And that's what my experience was. So the very thing that I thought was the worst thing that happened to me, it's just that man hit me in the head. I had never been so disrespected. Be hit over the head with a beer bottle, blood, a head wound, blood gushes out. And but it changed because I was on a road. I wouldn't. There's no reason to stop. Hell, I was having a ball, or so I thought. So for me, people have different kind of bottoms, because if you've been in prison 10 times, you would think there would be a bottom in there somewhere. I mean, prison, they never dangerous criminals. Then all the shit that happens on the streets. I mean, when you are in the drug game, there's drama every single day. Plus, you got to put on a facade that you are tough. That's why it could have been a disaster for me, because you get robbed, everyone's watching. They want to see what you're going to do. If you're not going to do anything, then they think that's what they can do. So it was a tricky situation. But the very thing I thought was the worst thing that ever happened to me, it turned out to be the best thing that happened to me, because it turned my world around. So that was 15 years ago, and I'm still here. Still here. When you know that you know that you know that you know. All right, people. I just want to do a story time today. Bye.